I want to introduce Jamie Rooney. Jamie is the resource and DARE officer over in York, and I met her while I was working over in York, and heard her story. We did a few programs in the children's room, and she, I'm writing this book, and I was like, oh, writing a book. Librarians love books. So when it came out, we set it up and we had her come in and speak, and it was truly an amazing story of resilience and beating the odds and following your dreams. And I think it really resonates with teens and young people, but it does with us older folks too, because so many of us have tried to do something and you fail, and you think, that's for other people, they get to do it. But Jamie's living proof of following that dream and not giving up, and look at what it turns out to be. So I'm sorry we don't have a bigger crowd, but we are on cable TV, and we'll reach more people through our cable station. So, Jamie Rooney.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. I know, I kind of felt like we should sit in a little circle, have our
we
tea.
could.
I'd be very comfortable with that. Well, thank you for coming out. I know it's January. It's been so cold. Today I walked my dog for the first time in, I think, almost 2 weeks, and he kept looking at me like, really? Is this really happening right now, Mom? Are we really going? And the kids went outside, so I totally appreciate you coming out. I know how hard it is, and it is easy to hibernate.
Yeah.
And we're all busy, so your time is valuable. So thank you. So I'll start off with, I never thought of myself as a writer. I never thought I would write a book, never mind publish it. And we have these times in our lives where things happen, and we kind of have, that moment where everything kind of stops. And you realize that you have to do something, or you have to make a change, or there's definitely, it's a defining moment in your life, and you never forget it. So when I was about, 37, my dad just got really sick really fast, and he was up at Eastern Maine Medical, and we knew he was going to pass, and we knew he had about a month or so. And so I was driving up there every weekend. I'd split the week with my sister, and I was driving up one weekend without the kids. I have a couple kiddos, and I was driving up there, and I had this moment in the car where I thought to myself, what if something happened to me tomorrow and my kids never heard my story? And I hadn't really told anyone my story. So it was a big deal to think about how I was going to give that gift to them when it was appropriate. So the long ride up to Bangor and then the ride back, I thought about it, and I decided that I would do a couple short stories of just defining moments. I like writing. I knew I could probably jot some stuff down and just keep it short and sweet and to the point, so that when they had a time in their life, because they will, when life is difficult, and they're going to call and say, I didn't get the job, Mom, or he broke my heart, Mom, or whatever it is, I could say, they're very discouraged about life. I could say, I want you to read, my thought was to give them these short stories in, like an envelope, and say, just read this tonight, and then I'll pick you up tomorrow, we'll go to lunch, and we'll talk about it. So I had the two defining moments in my mind, the very important times when things happened in my childhood where I had to make that decision. That I came to that fork in the road that everyone talked about when I was in high school, and I had to make a decision, and it changed the course of my life both times. So I started writing. That's how it started. That's how I became a writer. I am proud to say I'm a writer now. I'm an author. I love writing, but if you had asked me 5 years ago even, but I never ever would have thought I was going to write a book, never mind publish it and stand up in front of people and tell them my story. So when this started happening, I started writing, and I couldn't start in the middle, so I had to start at the beginning. And so I said, okay, I'll just start at the beginning. And I went back as far as I could remember, and I just started writing, and I got to tell you, it was like the best thing I ever did for myself. I've been through a lot of therapy. I've been through numerous counselors and different ways of trying to figure out how to fix me, or how to make make it okay, everything that happened. And the best form of therapy that I could ever imagine was writing. I mean, it really was. It just came out of me, and it just, I went through so many different emotions, but once I started writing, I couldn't stop. I'd put the kids to bed at 8 o'clock. I'd be back down at the computer. I remember one time my daughter was coming down the stairs. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and she's like, "Mom, you're still writing?" I'd slept. But she didn't know that, because when she went to bed, I was there. And then about 4 o'clock or whenever, I'd wake up and I'd go right back down, because I'd have this emotion flowing and this adrenaline, and I couldn't stop it. And things were coming up that I'd forgotten about, things that I'd locked away. I'm definitely very good at compartmentalizing. So like opening these little boxes, it was really like opening Pandora's box when I started writing, but it just flowed out of me. And I started from the beginning, and it took almost a year, but I couldn't stop, and then rewriting and going back and forth. But anyways, I never had intended to write the book. I'm so glad that I wrote the book. And here I am, and I'm going to tell you my story, and you'll get what I mean by that, because I really hadn't shared my story. Bits and pieces, enough to get by with my job, because I'm a police officer, and when you get hired as a police officer, it's kind of a big deal. They do a lot of checking, and I was 21 when I was hired, so I was really blessed. But I was working hard, and I'd been working a lot. I had a lot of jobs, and when I got hired, I had to go through the background check, and they do background check and a polygraph and all this questions and booklets and packets and stuff, and you've got to kind of put some stuff down. But it really came out at the PD when they had to do my background check, because my mother was living in a homeless shelter, and my dad was married to someone that I really didn't get along with. So I kind of had to tell little pieces, but I never talked about the abuse, especially the really bad stuff that had happened. And so I found that when I finished the book, I was healing, and each time I talked about it, I felt a little bit better about it. And it was less on me and more on them. I figured out how to do that. I figured out how to put the stuff in where it belonged, rather than questioning or wondering why it had happened to me. And I'm really, it's unfortunate that it took me until my 30s to figure that out. But I always knew that I was going to do something with my life. I always knew that I was going to be better than where I came from. And I always knew I was going to work with kids. So I've spent the last 13 years of it's now 18 years in law enforcement. The last 13 years I've been in the schools. I was in the high school for 9 years, and then I transferred over to the middle school. And that was an adjustment. Leaving the high school, I was really comfortable. It was like your favorite seat on the couch. But once I got to the middle school, I found that that's where I needed to be, and that's where I am now. So I'll share my story. I just wanted you to kind of get the idea of kind of see, this is me, this is who I am. I don't pretend to be anything that I'm not. I'm not eloquently spoken all the time. Sometimes I do all right. But it really is just about being honest, especially with our kids, because they get it and they know if you're trying to, kind of pull the wool over their eyes. So I always try to be very honest and upfront, and always encouraging. So my story started when the farthest back I can remember, I was about 6 years old, and 5 or 6, and we lived in Great Brook Valley. Great Brook Valley is the projects down in Worcester. You can actually see them off of 290 if you ever go down that way. They're these huge brick buildings, and they just go forever. And there's six apartments in each building, and it just flows. The buildings just kind of go like Legos down the street. I don't even know how long. I don't know how many people live there, but they're still there now. My mother, single mom, 4 kids, 2 different dads. So she had my sister and I when she was 19 and 21. And then she had my younger sister and brother about 6 or 7 years after that. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the projects roach infested. What people say about the projects, it's true. Filthy. People are just everywhere. Tiny 2 little bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, kind of like a little hallway. You had your washing machine, and then you had the counter. And then the living room was just, and dining room was just, it's just one room, and you just kind of fit everything in there. But the 4 kids, we were in one room, and then my mother had the other bedroom. My mother, she dropped out of school in 8th grade. She doesn't have a lot of tools. She since has been diagnosed bipolar. She was, she had a serious drug problem when we were growing up. She's an alcoholic. She's still alive. But she doesn't really, she stays away from the drugs as far as I know, except for marijuana, but considering what she used to do, that's really nothing. My mother, cocaine, heroin, you name it, she did it. Prescription pills, whatever she could find. And my memories of growing up in that apartment in the projects were just basically trying to figure out how I was going to get through each day. And I have an older sister, but my she's a sweetheart, and of course I love her to death. We're very close, but she's definitely more introverted. She's very shy, she's very quiet. She doesn't really have that spunk or fight that you kind of needed for the projects. She used to get beat up a lot. I used to beat people up that were beating her up a lot. We found ourselves in a lot of fights back then. But I lived in the projects until I was about 13. So it was day in and day out of that basic survival. I went to a little elementary school, and then I went to the middle school in Worcester. I had a lot of friends. I was pretty smart about making friends. I made sure that I made friends with the biggest, the baddest, whoever I could find. You know, most of my friends were older than me. I had kind of a little attitude. I had a little chip on my shoulder. You know, I kind of acted tough because I was really small. I could speak fluent Spanish back then, street Spanish, what I learned. I was pretty good. Now I only remember kind of the bad words, so I don't usually use those. It's funny how those things stick in my head, but then the rest of it I can't get. I do use it sometimes on the road, though, because I can pick up language. If someone's saying they can't speak English, I can pick up bits and pieces, but I can't. I used to be fluent. It was really awesome. So my mother was kind of an absent person. She wasn't really around much. She was always at someone's house, or even if she was at our house, she wasn't present. And then with the younger brother and sister, somebody had to figure out how we were going to get what we needed. So when it came to just basic needs, I'd have to figure it out, and I did. And I don't know where that came from. I just always had it. But I knew that we needed to have what we needed, and I was going to figure out a way to get it. So, I wasn't shy about asking for help or taking things that I needed. I'd get most of my clothes out of the lost and found bin, or those, the Salvation Army bins that they have, or the clothing bins. Back then they were mostly Salvation Army, but I could kind of get up in there, and my sister would give me like 10 fingers, or I'd just get up in there, and I could I could dig around and open the bags and then pull stuff out and be like, what do you think, and we'd get our clothes. And I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm actually proud of that, because I only took what I needed. I never took what I wanted. I only took what I needed. And sometimes my teachers, they'd come to school with a bag of clothes, and they'd say, these were my daughters. They don't fit her anymore. I thought maybe you'd like them. I think you'd really like them. And so then I get clothes that way too. My brothers and sisters, I got them clothes. I found things in those bins or wherever I could get whatever I could get. As far as the funny story I have about shoes is, I remember, I can't even tell you how many times, and this did come out in my polygraph, so I can tell you, but I don't know how many times I walked in, I'd wear my shoes until they were just, taped, duct tape, I don't know what I used, whatever I could use, or if I could feel the pavement underneath my sole of my foot. If I could feel the pavement with my foot through the sole, then I knew it was time to get a new pair of shoes. So I go to the local, it was Zayre's back then it was Ames, and then now it's, Walmart and Target. But I used to walk in and just imagine this little I really like towhead little girl walking in the projects, and outside it was the plaza, the Lincoln Plaza is about a mile and a half from where the projects are. I don't think anyone ever thought I was from the projects, because I know that I probably would have gotten more attention walking in, but I just kind of acted like I belonged there. And I remember just walking in, and I'd just kick off the shoes that were busted up, and I'd kick them under the shelf, and I just put on a new pair. And then I'd walk right back out, and I really can't tell you how many times I did that. I did it so many times, but I only did it when I needed it, and when I needed them. And I never took the expensive shoes. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, because I knew they'd notice that. But the other thing was, more important than that, I didn't need the most expensive shoes. What I needed was something that was going to keep my feet okay while I was walking to and from wherever I was going. Back then, I'd ride the city bus all the time, and that's so funny to me now, because if my kids are at the school bus stop, I'm like, are they okay? Are they okay? But back then I would just get on the city bus and put my 35 cents in the thing and go to the plaza, or go to the mall, or go wherever I was going to go. And I was free. Like my mother, there was no be back by dinner time. There was none of that. So I was going and moving and shaking with my friends. And then when it came to food was interesting. But again, I was never, I wasn't ever shy about it. I did what I had to do. But they didn't call them food pantries back then. But in the projects, they'd say on Sunday between noon and 4, come to this location and you can get food, like a food pantry. So I'd go, because my mother wasn't going to go, and we didn't have any food. So I'd go, and sometimes I'd drag my sister, and sometimes she wouldn't come. But it didn't matter, I was going. And I'd go, and I'd get in line, and they'd have those banana boxes, at the end of the table. And they just, the ones you see at Hannaford now, and the banana box, and I'd grab my banana box, and I'd put it on the table, and then you just kind of slide down. And the people behind the table would just kind of look at me, and I'd be like, we have 4 kids and 1 mom. And they'd be, where's your mom? And I'd come up with something. She's sick, she's taking care of the baby, she's doing whatever she's doing. I made up stories. I think they kind of stopped asking about, after a while they got used to me coming in, but they'd fill it up. They'd fill up that box, and it was heavy. But, we'd get the basics. We'd get the peanut butter, which I loved. That peanut butter. People make jokes about like the welfare peanut butter. I love that welfare peanut butter. The welfare cheese even more. But she'd always they'd be really kind to me, and they'd make sure that they gave me what I needed. And I'd walk down, I'd go down and I'd say thank you every single step of the way. And then I'd carry that box home, and I'd take my breaks and I'd carry that box home. And there was never acknowledgement. I don't remember my mother ever saying thank you. But I wasn't really looking for her to do that anyways. I was kind of looking to make sure that we had what we needed. So the only thing I couldn't stand on that note was the powdered milk. I couldn't do it. I had to I just couldn't do it. So I did water in my cereal when we had cereal, because I couldn't do the powdered milk. But everything else was pretty decent. If the local church was doing, if it was Thanksgiving or Christmas, they're always giving away turkeys. So I remember walking up, and this was right near my elementary school, so it was about a mile and a half. I mean, it was a haul. And so the plaza, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Worcester, but the plaza is here, and it's just a straight shot. But even back then, to think of someone like me just walking to and from, we walked to school back then. We did. Not barefoot in the snow uphill, but we walked to school. We didn't take the city bus because it was close enough. But so I'd go to church, which was right across the street from my elementary school, and I'd walk in with everybody else. And I'd be the only kid by myself. And I'd go in, and they'd give me a turkey, and I'd slap the thing home. I'd get it home, and I think my mom threw that one in the oven. I didn't cook that one. That wouldn't have been good. But I've since become a very good cook. But we used to I did the basics. If we had chicken or something, I'd boil it. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was figuring it out along the way. The point was, we had what we needed when we needed it. The other thing was the school lunch program is huge. It was huge. It is huge now. But I'd go through the lunch line at school, and those lunch ladies, I don't know how they knew, because I never told anybody. I didn't talk about my mom. I didn't talk about my situation. I didn't talk about my brothers and sisters. I didn't talk about the fact I hadn't eaten since the lunch I had there the day before, but they'd always take care of me, and they'd give me the extra tater tots or the Salisbury steak, whatever it was. But we always had lunch and sometimes breakfast at school. So thank goodness for those programs, because that's really how I survived through all of that. And I do a lot of work with those programs now, but I'll get to that later. I don't want to get off track too far. So growing up in the projects, I had a lot of friends, but my friends were older than me, and they were tough, and they were bad, and they did some bad things, and I got myself kind of caught up in some of that. I never did anything, criminal or anything, but I was definitely around a lot of stuff and hearing a lot of stuff, and drugs were a huge part. Like, people were starting to, my friends were starting to experiment with drugs and stuff, but they always had my back, they were like my family. They were my family. We had all grown up together, going through school, and I was one of them. They accepted me, and for that I was so grateful, because I had a place to escape to. I could go to their houses, and a lot of my friends were Puerto Rican. They were amazing. Like, their family is so important. They're really, really a tight group when it comes to their family. But I'd go over, and there'd always be a huge pot of something on the stove. It would be like rice and beans with chicken and just food, and it would smell amazing. And then there would be music, and there would be dancing. People would be just kind of dancing, and everyone was so happy, and they're happy to see each other. So I fed off of that, and I love that. Because my house wasn't like that. My house was just my house, and nobody was ever, the only joy was when I was interacting with the kids. I was always trying to make things better for them and take them to the playground or do whatever I could do. The playground was right out behind, so the buildings went rows and rows and rows, and then there was a street in between another set. But what they did was they blocked off the street, and they made that kind of like a huge, just free area to run around. So there was basketball hoops here right outside our door, and then there was some hopscotch and things, and then there was a playground. So it was kind of easy to keep the kids entertained. But I definitely feel like my sister and I got the best years of my mother. My younger sister and brother definitely got the worst years of my mother. My youngest sister, she's alcohol fetal syndrome. She has the abilities of I think 5 or 6 year old. She's been in and out of group homes. She bipolar, huge dependency on drugs and alcohol. She was in and out of, like, Massachusetts has a great treatment program. They're really supportive of that kind of stuff. She's been in and out of treatments. Right now she left to live with a boy, but we'll get into that. But my younger brother and sister definitely got the party like a rock star mom, where I think with my older sister and I, those first few years was very important. First few years, she was really trying. But the reason why my father wasn't in the picture, they were married. My mother was from Worcester. My dad was from Jackson, Maine, which is up by Unity, Dixmont area. And my dad he called it the big city. He went to the big city when he graduated high school at 18, and he met my mom in a bar. And they got married within a year, had my sister, and then my mom was pregnant with me. They moved up to Jackson, Maine, and my mom caught my dad messing around with the babysitter, so that didn't really work out. So then my mom packed us up. You can't make this stuff up. You just can't make this stuff up. So my mom was devastated. As I can imagine, she had dropped out of school in 8th grade. Her father passed away when she was 14. She dropped out of school in 8th grade and just lived this crazy life of partying and whatever. Met my dad, got married, tried to do the right thing, moved to Jackson, Maine. My dad fools around. She leaves him, ends up back in Worcester. Now we're living in the projects. So that's kind of how that all happened. So, there's a lot there. But anyways, so my younger sister, she struggles a lot, and we try to get her as much help as we can, but she's got to kind of do the work too. My brother, on the other hand, he does okay. He's made a few mistakes, but he is definitely on the upswing of that. So in the projects, I was there until I was about 12 or 13, getting back to the storyline. I was back in the projects. I was in the projects so I was about 13 and 14. And then, those friends, the music, the dancing, the food, all of that, I was really drawn to that. And boys started popping in and out, but I was still really young. Most of my friends were, like I said, older, but like 16, 17, and I wasn't. And so I started finding myself in these situations that were not great. And then one night, I went to my friend, her name, Marisol was her name, and our other friend, there were 3 girls, the 3 of us were at Marisol's sister's apartment, which was in the projects. And it was, again, another 2-bedroom apartment. Her sister and her husband lived there, and they had a little girl, I think she was about 5 years old. And we'd stay over there quite a bit, actually. We'd watch movies, we didn't care if we slept on the floor in a chair, it didn't matter. And we were having one of those nights. So we're watching a movie, and we're sitting together on the couch, and the door, so the couch is, this is perfect, because the couch is right here, and then the door to the bedroom's here, and the television's here, and we're just hanging out, the 3 of us, and having a great time. Now over here's a table, and her uncle is sitting there, and he's been drinking all day. He doesn't speak English. I definitely couldn't have had a conversation with him if he had any ability at all, but I don't remember him ever speaking any English. But he was just sitting over there, and he was fine. He never bothered us. I didn't care. I'm used to that. And his wife was actually pregnant, so she had gone to bed. This is late. This is 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night. So we're sitting there watching the movie, and the door opens and the little girl comes out, and she's like, I can't sleep, and she's rubbing her eyes, and she's upset. And so she sat on my lap, and that's what I do, right? I love kids, so we're just hanging out, and I'm like, okay, I'll put you to bed. So I brought her in her room, and I laid down with her, and we're talking, and she fell asleep, and it was wonderful. Like, the bed was so comfortable. She had all these stuffed animals. It was, I'm used to my bedroom in the apartment with my 3 siblings, which was, I should have described this a little more, was mattresses on the floor. So we didn't have beds or bunk beds or any, we had mattresses on the floor. And there weren't, we're lucky if we had a sheet or a blanket. Our pillows were sweatshirts with the sleeves wrapped up and tucked in. So we just figured it out, and that's whatever, that's what we did. The sheets on the window, I just remember this one sheet I had as a curtain was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sheet. You tacked it up, but you could see right through it. But I was like, okay, well, it's something. Because people would walk by. We had a 1st floor apartment, so people would be constantly walking by our bedroom in the projects at night or whenever. So we had this Ninja Turtles sheet up there, but we had just mattresses on the floor. So when I was in this little girl's bedroom, and there were fluffy pillows, and it smelled wonderful, and it was, they should have what every child should have. And so I laid with her, and we fell asleep, and it was, I fell asleep very quickly. I was very comfortable. I didn't have any worries. And then all of a sudden I heard the door open, and I was kind of, we'll say the door's over there. I was just kind of curved with my back this way, and the little girl, we were just kind of cuddled up. And then all of a sudden I was like, what's going on? And then he got into bed. The person got into bed, and I was like, what the? I was like, what the? But and I could smell the alcohol in his breath. I'll never forget that smell. And I was just like, oh, what am I going to do? And I was frozen, because here's this little precious, beautiful child. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Because I don't want to wake her up. I don't want to scare her. She was already scared. She was crying. I calmed her down. I got her to sleep. And now he's in here, and I need to get out of here. What am I going to do? So I waited, and I froze. And it was awful. And he definitely knew why he had gone in there. And I remember thinking, my friends are right outside that door. Surely this isn't happening right now. Maybe they fell asleep, whatever it was. Well, he assaulted me, and I'm laying there, and I got to the point where I started getting so mad, and just everything kind of took over, and I'm like, I need to get out of here. What am I going to do? So I thought, if I just pinch her, maybe she'll get startled. He'll stop. I can get up. And I'm not hurting her. I'm not trying to hurt her. I know she's going to be okay. I need to get out of here. And so finally, after this process, I did that, and she did. She woke right up. And I jumped up, and I grabbed my stuff, and I got myself, and I got out the door. And he didn't say anything. I ran out that door, and my friends are sitting there wide awake watching whatever it was they were watching. And I just remember this like, oh. Now that hurt me more than what had just happened, because I counted on them. That was my family, right? And they knew he went in there because, of course, they saw him because the door was right here. And what was he doing? And he was in there for such a length. What was he doing in there? Nobody questioned. Nobody checked on me. Nobody asked any, they just sat there. And so when I came out, and the only people that I trusted or had any faith in this entire world were sitting there letting me get assaulted by this drunk monster, I couldn't believe it. And so I just looked at him. I just remember, and I'm sure I looked, scared out of my mind. But I ran out of that apartment, and I ran home. And I ran the blocks that it took me to get there. And there are, no kidding, like prostitutes. There's all kinds of bad stuff going on. And people whistling or making noises. And I was like Forrest Gump, man. I just ran, and I ran, and I ran, and I ran. And I got to my house, and I went through the back door. Now, these doors are these big metal doors to get into the building. And, I got into the building, and I ran up, and I rapped on the door, and it was like a big wooden door. Had the bar. Most of the apartments, they had like a bar on the inside, on the back side, because that's the side of the apartment that usually got broken into the most, because people couldn't see the foot traffic, where in the front there's a lot of people around. So I'm rapping on the door, and my mother comes to the door, and she opens it, and she just said, she just looked at me, she goes, "Go to bed." I was like, okay. And I just went to bed. I didn't say a peep. And to this day, we still haven't talked about that. You know that? To this day, we still haven't talked about that. So I went into my room, and the kids, everyone's there, and I just laid there, and I thought about, what was I going to do? How was I going to get out of this? What was I going to do? My life was not going to be that life. I can never go back to those friends. I can never go back to that apartment. I don't ever want to be around those people, so what am I going to do? So the next day I went to a payphone. I called up my dad, and I said, you need to get me out of here. And I didn't say exactly why. I just said, I'm getting in a lot of trouble. I'm really worried. I'm scared, Dad. I need you to come and get me. And my dad, for all his faults, he came through, and he's like, okay, kid. And then 2 weeks later, so I just stuck close to home, and 2 weeks later my dad had come down. And I packed up my stuff, and I ended up in Jackson, Maine. And he enrolled me in school, and I transferred into the junior high up at Mount View. And that was a culture shock. So all of that stuff had happened. I never talked about it. Right? And so now I'm starting this new life. And that was one of the defining moments. The defining moment when this person hurt me, my friends betrayed me, my mother was completely absent, and in no way, shape, or form a parent. I had to make that decision, and that was a very difficult decision, because the city is what I knew. I loved the city. I loved riding the buses, the city buses. I loved going to the Galleria. I loved the big earrings and the hair and the MC Hammer pants. Like, I loved that. I was all about, being this person that I thought I was. Lipstick. Well, I don't wear any makeup really now. But anyways, so I end up in Jackson, Maine. So I go to Mount View. And that was a little bit of a description of what I look like, but it's pretty accurate. I was a huge fan of Aquanet and the hoop earrings, like I said, and those pants that were like the crotches like down to here, and I thought I was so cool. And then I walked into Mount View, and I was like, which one of these is different? Which one of these is not the same, right? So everyone looks at me, and they're like, oh my gosh, who is this girl? And it was painful. Oh, it was painful. The first few years there were pretty rough, but I was very fortunate because two of my friends, who are still my best friends, and they're both named Heidi, which is funny. But one was from Massachusetts. She was from the not Melrose, Wakefield area, and then the other one was from Puerto Rico. And she was recently adopted by a family. And we all kind of went to Mount View about the same time. And we all came from these different lives, these totally different places, but we also have a lot of things in common. So for us to all kind of start at that school around the same time was such a blessing. And I'm so grateful for it, because we really kind of molded together, and we have all done things with our lives based on the experiences that we've had before, which is pretty cool. But so then going to Mount View, that was a big deal, and then my dad, he's a great guy, blue collar farmer, had a small farm, had a had a small amount of beef cattle. He had around 30 cows. He'd have chickens, goats, pigs, so the girl from the city is now lugging buckets down to water the animals in the morning and shoveling poop and doing all that, and I didn't care about that. But I did have a serious issue there, and I knew it when I called him that night. His girlfriend at the time, who would eventually become his wife, was very abusive. She was physically abusive, verbally abusive. She, her nickname was Red because of her temper. And I knew that my dad was sticking with Red because they had a child together. She had a son with him, and he didn't have any boys. He just had my two sisters, and my dad is all about the boys. And my brother looks exactly like my father. So I knew that if I moved to Jackson, Maine, I'd have to deal with Red, but I'd have to figure that out, because weighing out the two options, which one was going to be better, and how was it going to work out? And I knew that I had better odds and a better chance. I knew I could handle taking a hit. I knew I could handle with getting my rear end warmed. I couldn't handle what had just happened, So I made that decision. And sure enough, she did not disappoint. Red was just, I don't know. And again, she had her first child when she was 13. She was abused over the years, which I never knew about until later in life. She definitely had a lot of struggles. And it just morphed into this. She was very young. She was 10 years younger than my dad, so she was not that much older than me. When I'm in my teens, she's in her early 20s. And she didn't know how to deal with all us kids, and then all of a sudden she has all this responsibility with us. But she had gotten a much better life. As small of a farm, and we didn't have a lot of money. We always had what we needed on the farm. Coming from where she had come from, it was a very good life for her, and she wasn't about to leave that. And so she was definitely a very interesting person. You never kind of knew who you're going to get when you walked through the door. Always kind of eggshells, and she had a serious issue with opiates. So we call it doctor shopping. She'd go to different doctors with the same complaint of back pain, neck pain, wrist pain. She had surgeries on everything. But we'd go to, we even drove as far, and she'd take us with her. That was the thing, she'd take us with her. We drove as far as Canaan, Maine, which was, over an hour, 2 hours, an hour and a half from where we lived, so that she could get a prescription of oxycodone. Or she called the doctor. I remember her calling and saying, I accidentally dumped him down the drain when I was taking one. And, so she had 3 different doctors. I knew of 3 different doctors. And there was all these pills. The pills were always around. So either you had fire hot temper Red, or you had high as a kite Red, which was, she'd be sitting on the couch and she'd have an ash off her cigarette that was that long, and she'd just be sitting there, and she'd even have some down on her shirt, or she'd be on the nod. A lot of times she'd just kind of be incoherent, and you just make sure she's okay. But my sister ended up there as well. We just did whatever we had to do. My dad wasn't around a lot. My dad worked a lot. He used to work his own farm, then he'd work at another dairy farm, and then he'd do carpentry work on the side. He spent some time traveling with this this guy that he knew from high school, and he'd make decent money, but he'd be gone for weeks at a time, and Red would use those times to have a bunch of people over, and there was always the partying thing again, but not as bad. Like, there wasn't, at my mom's house, there was cocaine mirrors on the table and people are shooting, it was just, it was awful. This was more of like alcohol and everyone's smoking pot and sitting around, and it was just one of those things I was kind of used to, so I just kind of go up into my room. But the thing that I couldn't, the hardest part with dealing with Red was, again, I never knew which Red I was going to get. So I had so many times when I would just be sitting somewhere, I'd be watching a show, or I remember I was watching Anne of Green Gables one time, and I was smiling because I love the program, and I was just sitting in the chair minding my own business and watching it, and she, for some reason, thought I was smirking at her, and I don't know where that came from or whatever she was on at the time, but she came by and she just said, "What the F are you, what are you smiling at?" or whatever she said, and she just smacked me, and then she knocked me down to the floor, gave me a good hit. She was known for, kind of you just never knew when you were going to get a hit. And that happened throughout high school. Multiple DHS referrals. But back then, and DHS, they do the best that they can. I truly believe that because I work with them hand in hand now. But back then, it was really, do you have your basic needs? You have a roof over your head, you got clothes on your back, you got food in your belly. Okay, kid. And I can't tell you how many, I can think of 3 different times when they intervened in our home and they'd send people. And it wasn't because of reports that I'd made. That's the thing. I never made a report. But I'd go to school and I'd have a bruise. Or somebody would see something and report it. I know that my school bus driver made a report. I know that another bus driver one time made a report because I got off the bus and I was off the late bus. I stayed over for science, and she just started smacking my head off the dashboard in the car because I didn't tell her I was staying after. But I did tell her I was staying after. But then I told her, and that didn't go over well either, and so it became one of those things. But those are just a couple of examples of Red and her fiery temper. She was nasty. She was nasty. And my father knew she was nasty, and so, I had to make peace with that. But my dad said, we had a conversation at one point, and he's like, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do? You're going to leave here." I still have Danny, who, my younger brother is the same age as my other younger brother and sister. They were born about the same time, so about 6 or 7 years younger. And it was his only son. And my dad was all about, the man holds the checkbook, he wouldn't even let me get my driver's license because he didn't think I needed to drive a car. Like, he was definitely very old school. But women, did their thing in the kitchen and had babies and took care of their man. And I think it's hilarious that I became a police officer. When I told him that, he was like, "What are you talking about?" I remember trying to do welding in Voc Tech because I thought, they make good money, I could become a welder. He told me he wouldn't let me. He wouldn't sign off on it. But I got the last laugh. No, anyways. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things in there that kind of brought me to my career in law enforcement. But my dad wasn't around, and this happened. And when we would tell him about these incidents, where we would be, my sister and I primarily, the other 2 kids in the house were both her sons, and then her older son, the one she had when she was 13, lived with his grandmother. He had never lived with his mother. His grandmother had raised him. So it was never directed towards them. It was always directed towards us. It was just this thing of jealousy and hatred and resentment. I don't know, but there were so many times when, my sister and I will talk about the time when I pulled Red off of her, or she pulled Red off of me, or I jumped on Red's back because she was, and we just tag teamed it together. And it came to a point, I was making it do. I was getting there, I was making it do, making do with what I had, and I was going to go, I was going to graduate from high school, I was going to figure out what I was going to do. And my junior year, finishing up my junior year, my sister graduated, and she went to a culinary program up in Washington County. She went to this like YCCC, I think it was back then. But anyway, so starting my senior year, my sister was gone. So the person I could talk to, the person who I would sit up all night and just talk about how much of a, how much different our lives are going to be, and how much of a, what red was, or, whatever we had going on, we just always had we always had each other's back, and we always looked out for each other. And if one was getting it, the other one would distract, or one had a lot on their load, like tons of chores, the other one would always help, we'd always help each other out. She was gone. And I'm getting through my senior year, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And my dad, he wasn't there. I don't remember really ever seeing him much. And I wasn't allowed to have sleepovers. I wasn't allowed to go to people's houses. I mean, if I was, it was very, very rare. And one of those Heidi's was having her birthday. And it was November 11th, and we were having a party. It was a sleepover, and her parents had promised that I'd get off the bus the Friday and I'd be home by 3 o'clock the next day, Saturday. Her dad would bring me home. So they had agreed to it, and I begged and begged and begged and begged for this sleepover. And I mean, there was nothing going on. There was I never did any kind of, there was no partying at Heidi's house. Her parents were really, really, they were smart. They were from the city. So we were just, we were hanging out. There were a bunch of kids. We had a great time. And then that next day, Heidi's dad called, and he said, I'm running late. I'm really sorry, Jamie. I know this is going to put you in a situation, but can you just call them? I'm stuck at work and I can't get out. I won't be able to bring you home till 5. And I said, okay. And then my anxiety starts to rise, because I'm like, oh gosh, what's going to happen? Is she going to be? So we didn't have a phone at my dad's house. So I called my grandmother, and my grandmother is not even a half a mile up the road. There's this big hill, and then the farm is up there, the main farm. My grandfather had like a dairy farm when he was alive. So I called my grandmother, and I was like, Gram, can you please, when Dad comes up to check on the cows, can you just tell him that I'm going to be home at 5, and tell Barbara because I'm going to be late, and I don't want him to be mad, Gram. It's not my fault. He's stuck at work. And I just remember, and she's like, Jamie, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. Of course, yeah, I'll tell him. Well, she forgot to tell him. And I came home, and I walked through the door, and I don't even know. It was just so quick. And my dad, of course, wasn't there, and he gone to his job. He worked, he'd work until midnight, and then go back to work at 4 a.m. at the dairy farm, and then it was just constant. So I didn't even see him in this short amount of time. But I walked through the door, and I could just tell she was good to go, and I'm like, oh boy, how am I going to do this? So I tried to I'm sorry, Mark had to work, and I'm really sorry. And I called Graham, and I told her, and I'm talking like 90 miles an hour, and I'm so worried, and I'm just like, and before you know it, she knocked me on the ground, and she just, the fury and the hatred that she had on her face, I can't even describe it, and I don't know where it came from, and it wasn't about me. I know that now, but at the time I was scared out of my mind. And she just sat on top of me, and she held my arms. I couldn't defend myself, and she just pummeled my face, just pummel. And I just remember just doing it, and it gets to a point where you don't feel it anymore. And I mean, it was very. She finally stopped when she got tired. And her 2 sons are standing there, and nobody intervened, and my sister wasn't there. Of course, my sister's away at school, so I didn't have my backup. And she finally got off of me, and I ran to the door, and I just said, I'm never coming back here. And she said, get your back here right now, and I said, I'm never bleeping coming back here. And I ran out that door, and I ran down to my friend's house. So my uncle's house is to the left, and then the farm is up on, so it's called my maiden name is Dodge, and it's called the Dodge Road because everybody is a Dodge. So my uncle's here, and then my grandmother's here. But down, if I went to the right, about a mile and a half, my friend, one of my dear friends, was there, and her parents, and they knew, everybody knew Red. Everybody knew kind of how messed up it was. But they said, you know, if it ever gets too bad, if it ever gets so bad, you come here, you come here. And I just remember running, and I ran, and I ran, and I got there, and I'm yelling, and I'm just a mess. And I collapse when my friend comes out, and she grabs onto me, and it's pitch black out. You know, there's no street lights up there. So they pull me into the house, and her parents are just looking at me, and the shock on their faces. And I didn't know what was going on. You know, I just knew my head hurt, and it was very painful, but I'm like, I'm okay. And it's crazy because it was awful, but I knew at that point that no matter what, I wasn't going back to that house. I knew that because I knew that the state would not let me go back to that house. Like, I knew it had been enough. Enough was enough. So I'm in the middle of my senior year. I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do. So anyways, I go into the house. I knew I wasn't going back. So I'm in the house, and they're like, we gotta take you to the hospital. And I was like, okay, really? And they're like, oh yeah, we gotta take you to the hospital. So this eye was completely shut, like completely buttoned up. This one I had like a little slit. I could see my lip, everything's bloody. I'm a mess. And I had bruises here from where my arms were held down, but everything other than that she was completely focused on my face. It was a personal attack. And I don't know where that was coming from. I don't know what that was, but I truly believe now that was her demons. Those were her demons, and she was just beating them out of me. And whatever she was on, I don't know. You know, we never really talked about it after. She apologized to me in this kind of half, apology years later. But I don't know where that came from. So I went to the hospital, and they had to call the police. And I'd had a couple incidents with police officers throughout my young years in the projects, but they were always really good. They were always really positive for me, not necessarily for the other people involved. But they called the police, and he came. And like the police officers I had met before, when my mother was getting arrested, or whoever was fighting with my mother was getting arrested, or in different community things, I'd see them. The DARE back then was a huge deal. They were always really positive. So when I heard that the police officer was coming, I was like, yes, okay, all right, that's kind of cool. So he came, and he's in his big uniform, and he's a younger guy, and I just remember I'm talking to him, and his chin is like, he's trying not to show any emotion. And I can see he's really holding it back. And I remember when I walked into the ER, the nurse that checked me in was one of my classmates' moms. It was not like a friend of mine, but someone we knew each other. We were nice to each other. I didn't have problems with anybody in school. I just was kind of on the other end, And so I remember her looking at me through the window, and she was like trying not to cry. I'm like, this must be pretty bad, because I still hadn't seen myself. And then I got into the room, and when the deputy came, he was doing, his little chin was like, it was just quivering, and I was like, geez, yeah. So they showed me a mirror eventually, and I got to take a look at it. Like I said, it was significant. But that police officer stayed with me, and he stayed with me for not 1 hour, he stayed for a few hours. And I know, you can go, you take a complaint, you take a report, you get the information, you write down everything, and then okay, you guys are all set, everybody's good, okay, and then you leave. He didn't do that. He sat there with me, and we talked about my future. We talked about things I could do, what was I interested in, where do I want to go from here. And I said, I want to be a police officer, this is what I want to do. And he's like, well, let's slow down. What are we going to do from here? And that's when I learned about emancipation. And I was like, well, that's a beautiful word, emancipation. Now, I kind of heard it before, but I didn't really understand the whole divorcing your parents thing. So he's like, this is what you need to do. You got to get a court, and you will get a court-appointed attorney. And I'm 16, by the way. I'm young. I'm a young high school senior, because in Worcester I was able to start school early. They start a little bit earlier. The rules were a little more flexible back then. I don't know if they still are. But I was only 16. I turned 17 in December. So I was 16, and we're talking about emancipation. You need to get a job. You need to get your grades up if they're not, and you need to have a place to live. So my friend's mother was there, and she's like, she's staying with us. And even though I knew it was a mile and a half down the road from my dad's house, I knew it was a safe place because I knew that if the police or if the state said I couldn't go back to that house, that they couldn't make me go back to that house. So we sat and we talked, and I got whatever I needed for my face, and they fixed me up, and I was there overnight, and then the next day I went. It was just a long night. I don't know how long I was there. It was just for hours, and took pictures and did all that stuff. And then I went back to my friend's house, and I had some time before I had to go back to school, which was really helpful. But I started working on what do I need to do? Where do I want to go? What am I going to do? And I'd already looked at colleges. I'd looked at USM and SMTC, and then Newbury College down in Boston. I'd already kind of worked on the applications a little bit. I knew that I wanted to do law enforcement. I knew that I wanted to work with kids in similar situations as me. I knew that I wanted to help people that were struggling, whether it was poverty, whether it was whatever way that I could. I wanted to ignite what I had in me. I wanted to ignite that in them. So I knew that. I knew that if I did that, I could make it my own. I could become a police officer, but I could make it kind of special. And so I applied to the couple colleges. I got into all of them, but I picked SMCC because it was half the price. I'm a smart girl. And I was like, well, the credits transfer? They're the same credits and they're half price? Yeah, okay, great, let's do that. So I did that. And, I got a job right away. Actually, by the end of that week, I had a job at the local IGA. And I'm still really close with the McCormicks who owned it. But I just remember going in there and I'm like, I need a job. And it's so hard to get a job up there because you have one little market and you have, the school, it has jeepers. I don't even know. You have 15 different communities going to one high school. So how many kids? And you've got this little market in these little towns. There's one market in each town and you've got 50 kids that all want to have a job. So I just stood there and I'm like, please, please, please. And I still had the blood in my, when you get a black eye, the blood in my eye. And he knew, everyone knew our name and our story, or they knew that the home life was hard. And I said, I'm not living at home anymore, and I really need to get a job, and I want to work. I promise I'll work really hard for you. And he's like, okay, come. It took some convincing. He said, come at 8 o'clock the next morning. If you're here at 8 o'clock the next morning. And I started working. That was my first job. And I was cleaning shelves. And it wasn't long. It was 3 weeks later. I was in the kitchen, and then by the end of, I think, February, I was kind of running the kitchen, so I took over because I saw an opportunity, right? I saw someone saw something in me, and then I started to see it in myself. And then it made me work harder, and I'd get there early, and I'd stay late, and sometimes I didn't have a ride, and we lived in Jackson, and that was in Brooks, and that was 9 miles away, so I had to ask people, and I kept, I was always kind of figuring things out the same way I was in the projects, when I was like, okay, where's the food? Where do I get the food? Oh, where's the clothing? How can I get that? What do you need? My brothers and sisters, oh, look at that, he needs that. Okay, I gotta make sure I get that. Whatever it was, I always kind of figured it out, because I wasn't ever gonna be less than what I could be, and I was never going to let the choices that other people made, whether it was my mother, whether it was my father, whether it was Red, whether it was the people in the projects, whether it was it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let that past define who I was going to be. So once I got that job, and then I finished up my senior year, my grades went through the roof. I was never an A and B student. I was never C average. I just survived. And then I got to that point, and I didn't have all this stress, right? I didn't have this stress. So I'd go home to my friend's house, and I'd be sitting at the table, and I'd have all my work out, and I'd be doing all my homework. And then I'd do the dishes, and then I'd cook dinner, and I'd do all these things. And they were like, what is going on? You don't have to do so much. But I was so appreciative of what they had given me. They'd given me a chance. I lived at their house. They had they didn't have anything. They had a little tiny cottage. They had a couch, and I slept on that couch, and I was so happy to be on that couch. And then on the weekends, I go to my other friend's house. So I was kind of like a couch surfer in a way, but I was a good girl. I went to my other friend's house, and I stayed at Heidi, that I stay at her house, and her parents would pick me up and drop me off, so that this other family could kind of get a break, because I know it was probably a lot for them. But I go to work every day after school. Sometimes I'd work on the weekends. I'd go between the two houses. My grades went through the roof. I got into the schools. I got financial aid. I got tons of financial aid because I had become emancipated. I went through the emancipation process. I went to court. I stood up in front of a judge. I told him I have a job. My grades are this. This is what I'm doing. And he had the police report, so I didn't have to like dredge up all that stuff. And you know, of course, they granted it. Nobody showed up. My dad and Red, nobody showed up. So there was no one contesting it. So it was really easy, for me at least, to get emancipated. So once I got emancipated, that like opened the door for all that financial aid, and I applied to every scholarship I could, and I got quite a few, thankfully. And so college was like, once I got to school, there was again no stopping. So I needed to figure out where I was going to work. And as I went through school, I met a lot of people, and you kind of do that networking thing. And when I finished at SMCC, I transferred over to USM. And I had a job. I was working at KFC, I was working at the bookstore, and I was working at Sports Authority. Why those three? I have no idea. They hired me, and they'd give me hours. So I was always working these different jobs, but I paid for school as I went. When I finished school, I think my debt was $3,500, something like that. I mean, it's crazy, because I just keep paying and paying and paying and paying. And I lived in the dorms, and then I rented a little bedroom from this little old lady who was adorable. And that was it. That was my journey. And I got to this point when I was right before, I was 19. I got a job I was 19, because back then you could be a reserve, like a rent-a-cop. When you're 19, now you have to be 21, which is probably a good rule. But back then I was 19, and I had no business. Like, I was 19 carrying a gun. I don't know. But Algonquin PD hired me. And God bless them, because they did. But I was walking the Marginal Way, and you guys probably all know the Marginal Way. So I was this little kid, like this. My hat was crooked, and my uniform was all goofy. And I would just walk up and down the Marginal Way and give people directions and whatever best restaurant. I wasn't supposed to, but you'd work around it, and it was really a great job. But when I was doing that job, like, things really started to fall into place. And I met this wonderful woman who needed a house sitter for her mansion on the Marginal Way. So you have this girl who grew up in the projects with cockroaches and garbage and filth, and people passed out on the floor in the morning, and just this crazy life of abuse and nonsense. And then all of a sudden I'm living in a house on the Marginal Way. Wow. No bills. Did I ever tell you that?
No.
I tell you that. Yeah.
Does she need someone now?
No, I know. They're amazing people, the O'Learys, but I lived there for a few years, and I paid off that debt, and I did all that. And then I got hired in York. And when I got hired in York, I knew I had to make the most of it. And I've been there. I was 21. I was 20 when I was hired as a dispatcher. And then when I turned 21, I got a job offer. It wasn't that easy. I had to jump through all the hoops, but went to the police academy, and I've been there ever since. But that house sitting, like, everything just kind of, good things started happening, and I just started rolling with it. And once I got my job, I just worked just at that job. Instead of working 3 different jobs, I figured out I could work at one job and work overtime and make more money than I was working at these 3 little, part-time gigs. And so there I was, and it wasn't long before I started bringing my past with me in a positive way. I think it was my 4th year in, and I went and I sat down with my chief. We have a trailer park in York, and there were some little kids running around barefoot, and I was just looking at them, and I'm like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? So it was about Christmas time, and I'm like, I'd really like to start sponsoring some families. I know that people in this community will help us. And my chief was like, really? Okay, go ahead. And so he's like, take it, kid, go with it. And my chief is so supportive. He's always been really supportive of some of my crazy ideas. But I went out and I reached out to families. I found out what they needed. I reached out to some really wonderful people and got what we needed. And my partners chipped in and helped out. And then, since then, now we've been doing it 15 years. We've been sponsoring families. And we sponsor between 25 and 30 families every Christmas. it was a joke one year because my friends work at York Hospital, and they said, "Oh, we're going to sponsor some families," and I was like, "Okay, let's see who does the best, who does the most families," and I think they did 3. And we did 30, so I was like, So we had to get them to step up their game a little bit. But the reason why I did that was because of the experiences I'd had. You know, nobody should ever have to worry about how they're going to get shoes, especially a child, how are they going to get shoes for their feet, or Christmas, you know, no presents under the tree. There were so many Christmases when we didn't have anything, and that's what had happened. One year, a woman knocked on the door, and I just remember going, my mom's in the door, and she answers the door smoking a cigarette. She's just standing there, and I don't even know, you know, I think she was in her pajamas middle of the day, and I walked over and I saw this lady, and she had a trash bag, and she was like, "We thought, a little birdie told me maybe you would like this, or we have this for you." And she said where she was from, and my mother handed it to me, and then I dragged it into the living room, you know, and my sister and my other brother and sister, all 4 of us were there, and we dumped it out, and there were toys for all of us. There were age appropriate, like different things, so they must have known that they were younger kiddos, and then my sister and we each took our turns, and we picked something from the pile. So the first thing I picked, and it's still is my favorite game, was Yahtzee. And every Christmas Eve, my sister and I still play Yahtzee because of that. Isn't that cool? It makes me gives me a little chills. But I'll never forget pulling that out of that pile, and then there was more, and then I got this ET thing I didn't really care for. But that Yahtzee game was so special to me. And so I thought, of course, there are people even in York that need stuff like this. And, you know, there's so many other things like drives, coat drives, socks, things, whatever I can think of to get to not even just people in York anymore. Now I've spread out, and we try to give our kids, our students, perspective, a different perspective, because they have their perspective, the life that they're living, the home that they're growing up with, their parents, their life. And some of them are wonderful, and they should be. Gumdrops and rainbows is what I say for anybody. You know, any child should have this life where everything is just gumdrops and rainbows. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But I'm going to do everything I can to make it that way. And then for the ones that need the support, how do we get the support that they need? And how do we make it so that it works for them? And it has to be genuine, because if it's not genuine, they'll call you out, and that's the end of it. Whether they're in high school, they're in middle school, it doesn't matter, even the little ones. But that's what it's all about for me now. So when I wrote the book, I was, it's hard to share all of that stuff, and in greater detail, obviously, than what I'm sharing here. But there's a lot of little stories in the stories. There are a lot of, sometimes you're going to laugh, sometimes you're going to probably get mad or get a little bit upset, but you got to remember that at the end of the day, everything that happened brought me to where I'm at. And I've been able to speak all over New England. I've been able to go to schools. I've been able to meet some really great kids. I went to the youth center just a short while ago. I went to the youth center, and I gotta tell you, for someone that grew up in the projects, and I think I'm pretty tough, I was sweating. I'm like, oh gosh, these kids are gonna eat me alive, right? Because I heard stories of them, doing not so nice things to other people that had visited. And it takes a lot to go to the youth center. If you're in the youth center, we don't put our kids in jail, So if you're in the youth center as a young person, you've really, really made some mistakes. So I was nervous, and then I got in there, and I just was like, just do it. This is what it's all about. And then by the end of it, I had them, they started off like this, a couple of them, and the leg was twitching, and one wouldn't even look at me, and she was just like this. And I told these different stories, more towards their age and different things that I thought they'd relate to. But by the end of it, open arms, everyone was really comfortable. Everyone was so appreciative. They came up, they talked to me, and I connected with them. And so for me, best thing ever. They read the book, and they don't read books up there. The guy told me, he's like, I can't believe it. I couldn't get it out of them. So get it away from them. So that was really, really cool. Some had read it before, some after. But anyways, that's kind of the gist of my story. And the work that I do now, most of it, I'd say, comes from experiences I've had. But a lot of it is constantly trying to be forward thinking and trying to see what is the next need, or how can we make this better, because sometimes things are good. Everybody likes when it's good, just like that seat on the couch, your seat on the couch, but you can always make it like a little bit better. And I don't know when I'm going to run out of steam, but I've got like a few years left. I'm going to give it all I can because it's my legacy. And that's really important to me because I want my kids to be proud of their last name. And I didn't necessarily have that feeling, so that's why it's important to me. So I'm happy to answer any of your questions. I don't know if I went over. I did go over. Sorry about that.
Fast questions.
Yes, do you guys have any questions? No.
I did.
You're good. It's tough. I know. It's very...
After you got, you decided to leave the house, did your dad come into the hospital? Did your dad ever have a conversation like, I'm sorry this happened to you? That's the first part of it. And the second part is, what about the father that was late bringing you home? Did he know what happened to you when you got home? That must have been so horrible for all.
Yes and yes. So
Yeah.
my father came down, it wasn't the day after, or the day, that morning I got out of the hospital, it was the next day. He came down, he pulled up, he had an old blue Buick. And my dad pulled up the driveway and he sat outside in the car, and my friend's dad had gone out. I was in lockdown. I wasn't going anywhere or doing anything. I was pretty banged up and I was really emotional. I was having a hard time. And I know, can you imagine?
Right.
He went out and he said he just wanted to talk to me, and I was like, no, it's fine, I can do it. Now, my face, I'm busted up. So I went out and I sat in the car with my dad, and he said, why did you do it? Why did you do it? And I'm like, what did I do? What are you talking about? Why did you attack her? And I was like, Dad, I didn't attack her. And he's like, you attacked her? They all said that you attacked her. I'm like, Dad, I didn't attack her. Dad, look at me. Look at my face. And he did. He looked, and he's like, really, he's holding back the tears, and he had a couple tears, and he's like, he's like, they said you attacked her. And I'm like, Dad, and there had been so many times when she had lied, and I'm just like, I got tired of saying she's a liar. I just got tired of it. I didn't know where it was coming from. I didn't understand it. I couldn't understand it, because you can't understand crazy. You just can't. You got to give yourself that break and let it go. But I said, Dad, look at me. Does she have any marks on her if I attacked her? And I'm 16 years old, so I wasn't super small. She's not a tall person. It just didn't make sense, Dad. She's not. And he stopped, and he said, well, what are you going to do? I want you to come home. And I said, I'm not coming home. Well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to get emancipated, and that's what I'm going to stay here. You can't stay here with these people. I said, these people, Dad, will never hurt me, and I'm going to be fine. And that was it. And we hadn't talked almost 5 years. I mean, it was a long time. And then slowly little things. I'd go to my grandmother's house to visit. Oh, it was so funny. I got my license when I went to college, because I wasn't allowed to have my license. And I didn't only get my license, I bought a car. And so the first thing I did that first weekend was drive that little red Ford Escort hatchback, which I loved. It was the best car. A perfect little bucket seat. I didn't care. It was $10 to fill up the tank. It was the best car. Shook when you got to 70, so you kept it right around there. But I drove up there, and I made sure to drive really slow by his house. Because when you're in Jackson, whenever someone drives down the road, because nobody comes down the road unless you live down there, everyone looks out the window. So I was like, And then I went to my grandma's house, and he found out I got my license. He was like, how'd you get her license, blah, blah, blah. But my friends in college taught me how to drive in the parking lots in Portland, which is really cool. So that was that. And then, yeah, they're still like my parents. Those people, her parents, and both sets, actually, Thanksgivings, Christmases, for the longest time, I'd go there, especially when I was in college and I was younger.
This must have felt so horrible.
They didn't know.
They didn't know.
No, and that was the house where the weekends. I said that, right?
Okay.
So they're my family. They're still my family. So whenever something big is going on, they're the people that I call. My dad did pass away that short period of time that I had with him when I decided to start just to do the defining moments of short stories, and then kind of turn into a book. But he passed away, and then after that, I don't really have a lot of reasons to go up there, other than my grandmother. I'm trying to convince her to come down and stay at my house for the winter, because she just stays home, but she loves her house and she loves her friends, and she's hilarious, actually. But Amazon Prime, thank goodness for that. I send her groceries Amazon Prime, Graham, what do you need? Because she won't go out, and the service is up there.
So you're still taking care of people.
Yeah. I'm always going to do that. I'm always going to do that.
But what's the recipe for children to overcome such odds? What is that? What's the magic? What's
They
the
have
recipe?
you have to believe in them, and it has to come from these places. So
Someone believing in them? Did you
yes.
have one person that...
there
So
was,
it was all outside people?
throughout the course of my time, there was always, not so much in the projects. I can't really think of anyone that ever checked in with me other than like second grade teacher, fourth grade, sixth grade teacher. Those, my teachers in my school and the lunch ladies were amazing, and I love my lunch ladies now. I always take really good check-in on them and stuff because they're just the most important people, and they know the kids. If anybody knows those kids in that school, it's your lunch ladies, it's your custodians, it's the front office people. You know, those are the people. But so those, I had little things along the way. I don't know, some of it is like, you know, you have this little spitfire in you. The other part was believing in it. And when you know, certain people took the time to sit with me, like that officer at the hospital, or when the police officers used to come to I can't even, if I saw my mother's rap sheet, I wouldn't even know. It's probably longer than my arm, but between her and her different boyfriends, there were always like different boyfriends around. The police would come, they'd always check in with me, and they'd always say, "You're okay, kid, you can go to bed now." Oh, that's the part I didn't tell you. I was the one calling 911. I was the one calling 911. Imagine that, like a young little 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid picking up the phone and calling 911 because people are fighting in our apartment in the projects. I had to do it because it's 2 o'clock in the morning. The baby's crying. They're fighting. Somebody's getting hurt. I need something to happen here. I need something to change. So I figured it out. So